All right, this is a good spot to talk about something that you may have noticed along the Rio Grande, something that is pretty interesting. Jetty jacks, that's what these things are behind me. You can see them over here as well. Now, if you pay attention to movies, these may look familiar to you. They may look like something that you've seen out of Saving Private Ryan. Look at this one. See that? The tree is growing around the jetty jack. That's an indicator of how long this tree has been here and how long the jetty jack has been here. Their intention is similar to they do a job. They were put here to do a job, a very specific job. At the time of their placement in about the 1920s, 1930s, there would have been almost no trees down here, period. It would have been mostly chopped down for firewood purposes. And you can find pictures, I'll try to include them in here, pictures of Albuquerque and the river back at that time when there were no trees down in the river. So what trees do is they do a really important job. They prevent erosion. They prevent the river from moving too much around the floodplain. And I already talked to you a little bit about the floodplain. So they do this really important job, and you can see right now they're doing it. You can see behind me is a space where water can sometimes flow at high water marks. But we have a little bit of a hill behind me here, and this hill is sort of facilitated and maintained by the presence of these trees. So jetty jacks were intended to do essentially the same job as trees. They were placed here by the Army Corps of Engineers way back in the day to sort of replicate the job, the ecosystem service that roots do. They're basically surface roots. And the intention was that if there was a lot of water moving through here, the jetty jacks would collect dirt, they would collect debris just like they are now, and they would slow down the water so the water was able to sort of drop some of that sediment, slow down, and stay in the river and not move into the city. Because where the jetty jacks are now, directly behind me is the river. Then we have the jetty jacks, and in that direction is the city. And if the jetty jacks were not here back in the day when there were no trees, the river could easily just move into the city and flood, and it often did. In fact, it flooded pretty regularly. There are stories from the 1920s when Old Town was on the west side because of a flood. The river was actually flowing in between present-day 12th Street and 2nd Street. So this is a dynamic river. As I've talked about, its evolutionary history, it's sort of the history of the river, that's ecological history. It's not the river you're used to now. It used to flow extensively. And in order to manage that, human beings, instead of letting nature sort of do its thing, they tried to replicate nature. And jetty jacks were one example of that. Just like the levee system, which I'll show you, or have shown you, I don't know. The levee system was intended to prevent flooding. Trees and bushes that were brought in that are not native, like the salt cedar that you see a little bit of behind me here. It's a little hard to see, but this is salt cedar. It's pretty common. I'll show you that when I talk. You've probably seen that, or I'll show you that when I do my video on invasive species. But these things were brought in to sort of replicate nature because we prevented nature from doing its job. So that's the jetty jacks. That's why they're here. That's what they're for. They're intended to prevent erosion. And they sort of serve no purpose now other than to be weird and kind of dangerous. I've been in places in the river where the jetty jacks are actually in the river themselves and you can barely see them popping out of the top. And if you were to accidentally fall into the river or jump into the river on top of a jetty jack, that'd be the start of a really bad day. So there is a movement to get rid of them. They've actually removed thousands of them from the Albuquerque area, but there are still tens of thousands up and down the Rio Grande and all over the western US. But right now, like I said, over by just north of Rio Bravo Boulevard, there's quite a few still, and there are more up by Alameda as well. So that is what these things are, and now you can tell your friends.